Imagine a country where you can find billionaire princes, luxury cars covered in gold, and futuristic city projects rising in the middle of the desert. Yet at the same time, for many years, simple things like listening to music in public or women's freedom were extremely restricted. That's what you're about to see now on World No Filter. Do you want to be part of a journey full of discoveries, entertainment, and content that will truly surprise you? Subscribe to our channel by clicking here and don't miss any more videos. This place exists, and it's called Saudi Arabia. For a long time, it was one of the most closed and mysterious countries in the world. A place where religion, power, and money intertwine in a unique way, creating a society full of contrasts. But something is changing, and quickly. Today, Saudi Arabia is trying to reinvent itself, opening its doors to tourism, entertainment, and even projects that seem straight out of science fiction movies. But what is really happening behind this transformation? In this video, you will discover how a country built in the middle of the desert became one of the richest nations on the planet, how the power of the royal family works, what rules shape the daily lives of its people, and why Saudi Arabia is becoming one of the most intriguing and contradictory places in the modern world. Located in the heart of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia occupies one of the most strategic positions on the planet, surrounded by countries such as Jordan, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates. It dominates much of the Arabian Peninsula, a region that for centuries has connected trade routes between Asia, Africa, and Europe. But its importance goes far beyond geography. It is here that two of the holiest cities in Islam are located, Mecca and Medina, which receive millions of pilgrims every year. In addition, the country holds some of the largest oil reserves in the world, making it a key player in the global economy. In other words, decisions made here can impact everything from gasoline prices to the stability of international markets. This makes Saudi Arabia one of the most influential and closely watched countries in the modern world. Long before becoming a global power, the region that is now Saudi Arabia was made up of vast deserts inhabited by nomadic tribes. It was in this seemingly inhospitable environment that one of the world's largest religions was born, Islam. In the 7th century, in the city of Mecca, Muhammad emerged, considered by Muslims to be the final prophet. His message quickly spread throughout the region, uniting tribes that had previously lived in conflict and giving rise to a new cultural, religious, and political force. Within just a few decades, Islam spread beyond the borders of the Arabian Peninsula and expanded across 3 continents, shaping civilizations and influencing billions of people to this day. This profound origin means that Saudi Arabia is not only a wealthy or strategic country, but also one of the most important spiritual centers on the planet. To understand Saudi Arabia today, it is necessary to go back to the setting that shaped its identity, the desert. For centuries, much of the Arabian Peninsula was dominated by arid landscapes, extreme temperatures, and vast stretches of sand that required resilience and constant adaptation. In this challenging environment, the Bedouin tribes emerged, nomadic groups that moved in search of water and grazing land. Survival depended on practical skills, such as navigating by the stars, understanding the terrain, and maintaining a strong culture of cooperation. Values such as honor, loyalty, and hospitality were not merely traditions. They were essential for living in a place where any mistake could be fatal. These tribes developed a unique cultural identity, marked by oral storytelling, poetry, and a strong sense of belonging. Even with the passage of time and the modernization of cities, many of these customs remain present in Saudi society today. This past explains much about the country's behavior and social structures. In a land where survival depended on the unity of the group, tradition and respect for one's roots became fundamental pillars, and they continue to influence Saudi Arabia to this day. For many years, Saudi Arabia was known for having some of the strictest social rules on the planet. And for those observing from the outside, many of these norms can be difficult to imagine in everyday life. Much of these rules are linked to interpretations of Islamic law, which have strongly influenced public behavior. For decades, activities considered common in many countries were highly restricted. Movie theaters, for example, were banned for years. Concerts, public events, and even music in certain settings were limited or non-existent. Social interactions also followed specific guidelines. Men and women who were not from the same family faced restrictions when interacting in public. Restaurants, schools, and even some commercial spaces were divided by gender. Displays of affection, such as holding hands or hugging, could attract unwanted attention. Clothing has also always played an important role. Women traditionally wore the abaya, a long garment, while men also followed specific dress codes. All of this was part of a system intended to maintain standards considered appropriate by the local culture. In recent years, some of these rules have begun to change, especially as the country opens up to tourism and entertainment. Even so, many of these norms still influence daily life, showing how tradition and modernization coexist side by side in today's Saudi Arabia. To ensure that these norms were respected, there was an institution that for a long time shaped everyday life in Saudi Arabia: the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, better known as the Mutawa. For decades, this religious police force patrolled streets, shopping centers, and public spaces, monitoring whether social and religious rules were being followed. They could approach people over issues such as clothing considered inappropriate, prayer times, or behaviors seen as improper. For many Saudis, the presence of the Mutawa created a constant sense of surveillance. Small details of daily life could attract attention, which made people very mindful of their behavior in public. In recent years, the power of this institution has been reduced, especially following the country's more recent reforms. Even so, its influence has left deep marks on society, helping shape how many people live and behave to this day. In addition to the more widely known rules, Saudi Arabia has also been marked by certain laws and customs that, to outsiders, may seem surprising and even controversial. For many years, for example, women were not allowed to drive in the country, a rule that drew international attention until it was revoked in 2018. Before that, they depended on relatives or drivers to get around, which directly affected their daily autonomy. Another notable aspect was the guardianship system, in which important decisions in a woman's life, such as traveling or taking certain jobs, could depend on the authorization of a male guardian. Entertainment was also heavily restricted. Movie theaters were banned for decades and only reopened in recent years. Music events, festivals, and international concerts were virtually non-existent, something that has only begun to change in the past few years as the country gradually opens up. Another striking aspect is the ban on alcohol consumption, which remains one of the strictest rules to this day. Unlike in many countries, there are no exceptions in public settings, and the penalties can be severe. These laws show how Saudi Arabia built its identity around specific values over time. At the same time, recent changes indicate that the country is undergoing a transformation, balancing tradition, international pressure, and a desire to reinvent itself on the global stage. In everyday life in Saudi Arabia, daily routines can seem like a fascinating blend of tradition and modernity. In cities such as Riyadh and Jeddah, modern skyscrapers, luxurious shopping malls, and stylish cafes are part of the landscape, reflecting a country that has developed rapidly over the past few decades. At the same time, local culture remains deeply present. The rhythm of the day is influenced by prayer times, and many establishments still pause their activities during these moments. Hospitality is also one of the pillars of Saudi society. Welcoming visitors warmly is not just good manners, but a deeply rooted tradition. With the country's recent opening, new entertainment options have begun to appear, such as movie theaters, sporting events, and festivals. Even so, daily life continues to be shaped by cultural and religious values, creating a unique balance between a modern lifestyle and traditions that have been passed down through generations. For a long time, the role of women in Saudi Arabia was one of the most debated topics around the world. In a society marked by conservative rules, women faced several limitations in accessing basic rights in everyday life. However, in recent years, significant changes have begun to take place, and at a relatively fast pace. One of the most symbolic transformations was the right to drive, approved in 2018, which completely changed women's mobility in the country. In addition, new laws expanded access to the job market, allowing women to hold positions in companies, businesses, and even sectors that were once predominantly male. Today, in cities such as Riyadh, it is already possible to see women working in shops, offices, and airports, as well as participating in public events. Universities also have a strong female presence, reflecting a more educated and active generation. Despite these advances, society still maintains many traditional elements, and not all changes occur at the same pace across every region. Even so, this transformation process shows that Saudi Arabia is going through a period of adaptation, trying to balance its cultural roots with new social and economic demands. But just as in other countries with stricter rules, Saudi Arabia also has a side that rarely appears in public. Behind the norms and the official image, there is a more discreet reality, marked by contradictions and everyday adaptations. In private settings, especially in large cities like Riyadh and Jeddah, social dynamics can be quite different. Gatherings among friends, family meetings, and even small celebrations take place away from public view, creating spaces where people feel freer to express themselves. In addition, with the rise of technology, many young people use the internet to connect with the outside world, consume global content, and follow international trends. This creates an interesting contrast. While public life still follows well-defined cultural standards, more flexible behaviors and outside influences emerge in private life. This duality means that the country operates on two levels at the same time, one more visible, guided by tradition and social norms, and another more discreet, where people find ways to adapt those rules to the realities of everyday life. It is precisely this combination that makes Saudi Arabia one of the most complex and intriguing places in the modern world. When talking about Saudi Arabia, it is impossible to ignore one of the aspects that most sparks curiosity around the world: its extreme wealth. Thanks to its enormous oil reserves, the country has accumulated a fortune that has placed its elite among the richest in the world. Among members of the royal family and business people connected to the energy sector, there are billionaires who live at a level of luxury that is hard to imagine. Massive mansions, fleets of sports cars, yachts, and even private jets are part of the everyday life of some of these individuals. In cities like Riyadh, it is not unusual to find shopping centers filled with high-end brands and exclusive luxury experiences. But what draws even more attention is how this wealth also translates into global influence. Saudi investments can be found in companies, sports, technology, and even major international events. At the same time, this concentration of wealth contrasts with the reality faced by part of the population, creating yet another of the country's many dualities. This scenario reinforces the image of Saudi Arabia as a place where tradition, power, and money blend together, often at levels that seem straight out of a movie. If Saudi Arabia's present already draws attention, what the country is planning for the future seems straight out of a science fiction movie. One of the most impressive examples is the NEOM project, a megacity that promises to redefine the way we live. Within this plan is the Line, a linear city being built in the middle of the desert, without cars and with everything connected through advanced technology. The idea is to create a sustainable environment where artificial intelligence, clean energy, and cutting-edge infrastructure are part of everyday life. These projects are part of a broader strategy to reduce the country's dependence on oil and position Saudi Arabia as a global center of innovation. At the same time, they raise debates about feasibility and environmental and social impacts. Even so, they clearly show one thing: Saudi Arabia does not just want to follow the future, it wants to help build it. For centuries, Saudi Arabia was a land of deserts and tribes. with limited resources and little presence on the global stage. But everything changed after a moment that would completely transform the country's destiny: the discovery of oil. In the 1930s, enormous reserves began to be found beneath Saudi soil. What had once seemed like endless sand was hiding one of the greatest sources of wealth on the planet. Within just a few decades, the country underwent an impressive transformation. Modern cities rose in the middle of the desert. Roads were built, and the economy grew at a rapid pace. With oil came investment, international influence, and a level of wealth that placed Saudi Arabia among the most powerful nations in the world. The country went from being an isolated region to becoming a key player in the global economy. And to this day, much of Saudi Arabia's power and influence remains directly linked to the resource that changed everything. But all this wealth and transformation are concentrated around a single power structure: the Saudi royal family. Unlike many modern nations, the country is an absolute monarchy, where power is held by the House of Saud, one of the most influential families in the world. At the top of this hierarchy is the king, currently Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, along with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has been leading important changes in the country. The royal family not only governs but also controls a large part of the economy, political decisions, and the strategic direction of the nation. With thousands of members, this dynasty holds influence that goes far beyond Saudi borders. At the same time that it promotes modernization and major development projects, it also maintains a highly centralized system of power, making Saudi Arabia one of the few countries in the world where a monarchy still exercises almost total control over the state. In Saudi Arabia, politics and religion do not operate separately. They are deeply interconnected. Since the country's formation, the alliance between the royal family and religious leaders has helped establish a system in which laws and decisions are strongly influenced by interpretations of Islam, particularly the branch known as Wahhabism. In practice, this means that many everyday rules do not come only from the government but also from religious principles. Issues such as public behavior, clothing, and even entertainment were, for a long time, shaped by this relationship between faith and power. For decades, this connection rigidly molded Saudi society. In recent years, however, some changes have begun to emerge, attempting to balance religious tradition with economic and social openness. Even so, understanding this connection between religion and government is essential to understanding how Saudi Arabia functions and why it remains one of the most unique countries in the world. For decades, Saudi Arabia was one of the most closed countries to tourism in the world. The entry of foreigners was highly restricted, usually limited to workers, business people, or pilgrims traveling to Mecca and Medina. For most people, visiting the country was practically impossible. But this reality has begun to change in recent years. As part of its economic transformation plan, the government has started investing heavily in opening the country to international tourism. Electronic visas have been simplified, new air routes have emerged, and the country has begun presenting itself to the world as a new travel destination. What many people do not expect is the diversity of experiences the country offers. In addition to modern cities, there are impressive archaeological sites, such as Al Ula, with massive rock formations and ancient structures carved into stone. There are also deserts, mountains, and even little explored coastal regions. At the same time, international events, music festivals, and sporting competitions have become part of the country's calendar, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. This opening marks a new phase for Saudi Arabia. A country that remained closed for a long time is now beginning to reveal its landscapes, culture, and ambitions to the world, inviting visitors to discover a side that almost no one had the opportunity to see until recently. After all of this, it becomes clear that Saudi Arabia is much more than the stereotypes we often see. It is a country where tradition and modernity exist side by side, where a past deeply connected to religion meets a future that aims to be technological, global, and innovative. Throughout this video, we explored a land that emerged in the middle of the desert, shaped by tribes and by the origins of Islam, and that, in just a few decades, transformed into one of the richest and most influential nations on the planet. We also learned about its social rules, its contradictions, the power of the royal family, and the ambitious projects that aim to completely reshape the country. But perhaps the most interesting thing is realizing that Saudi Arabia is in a moment of transition, a country that, while preserving its roots, is also trying to open itself to the world and reinvent its own identity. And now I want to know your opinion. Would you be curious to visit Saudi Arabia someday? Do you think the country will manage to balance tradition and modernization? Or do you believe these changes could create even more conflicts in the future? Leave your thoughts in the comments. It will be very interesting to read your perspective. And if you enjoyed this video and want to keep discovering surprising facts about countries around the world, make sure to leave a like. It really helps the channel continue to grow and bring more content like this. And of course, if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. Because in the next video, you'll discover another place on the planet that will probably surprise you even more.